did in the Baltic states. Remember Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia? Nations that were given to Stalin with the Hitler-Stalin Pact, whose people rose up in revolution against the Russian communists. And what did we do? We told them, stay with Russia. We want to help Gorbachev. Don't go for independence. This is the same Bush who claims to be a great supporter of democracy. And of course, the situation in Russia. I don't have the time to develop this. I will at some other occasion. But the situation in Russia is a disaster right now. But if you went with the policies of Bush's friends, the British, the free trade, free market policies, you'll start a total collapse in Russia, the same kind that's existing today in Czechoslovakia and Poland, which will allow the communists to reassert their power. The only thing that can enhance or continue a dictatorship in Russia would be the attempt to impose Bush's economic policies on those countries. And that's in fact what Bush is trying to do, which would lead to civil war in Russia and a reassertion of the Red Army. And one thing you should know is that the Red Army has not given up its nuclear warheads. It has not given up its power. Now, foreign policy is a disaster. The New World Order is finished. It's not going to exist. But Bush is preparing possibly another desert storm against Iraq. Now, what is it that this moment has in common with a year ago? Well, let's go back a year ago, July 1990. You remember what was in the headlines then? It wasn't Saddam Hussein. It wasn't Kuwait with its freedom-loving emir. It was the economic crisis. Remember? I'm the president who will balance the budget. You remember? Read my lips, no new taxes. But you remember what happened last summer? Bush was about to throw both of those out the window. And he didn't really want people to know too much about it. And so he grabbed at this situation, grabbed at the Iraq situation, to rally the country around the flag and around yellow ribbons so that people would forget that we were about to be hit with a financial crisis that, for all intents and purposes, is worse than the Depression in the 1930s. There are people all over the world dying today, in Black Africa, in parts of Asia, in parts of Latin America, dying today because of the collapse of this debt-ridden world economy. We've seen it in this country. What about the savings and loans? They barely exist. What about the banks? Well, we just saw a really interesting thing happen. Two bankrupt banks, Manufacturers Hanover and Chemical Bank, joined to become the biggest bankrupt bank, except for Citicorp. Now, Citicorp immediately got jealous, and I heard a rumor the other day, Citicorp wants to merge with the Resolution Trust Corporation. Don't be too surprised. We just had the nation's largest insurance company collapse, Mutual Benefit Life, 400,000 policyholders. Think about this. People who have been putting their money in year after year. And what happened? It's gone. There's no security. Bush doesn't want you to think about that, though. He wants you to think about that nasty Saddam and his non-existent nuclear weapons. Now, I'll just point out, for those who aren't aware of this, that much of the looting of the savings and loans was done by a group of drug bankers associated with the Anti-Defamation League. And Michael Milken, remember the junk bond king who was milking the economy? These are the people who benefited by Reagan-Bush economics. There's one firm, Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts, KKR, which between 1976 and 1990 borrowed $58 billion from banks, insurance companies, and pension funds to take over companies in these so-called leveraged buyouts. Your money, if it's in an S&L, or a pension fund, or an insurance company, may have been used to give Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts the funds to buy RJR Nabisco. And when they go broke, and your pension fund is gone, remember, This was the Reagan recovery that you heard so much about during the 1980s. The deficits, very quickly. The 1991 budget deficit, which wasn't supposed to exist. Graham Rudman was supposed to eliminate deficits, remember? Phil Graham, the brilliant genius from Texas A&M, the guy who, if this is his idea of balancing a budget, you can imagine the problem his accountant has with his taxes. 1991, the budget deficit is projected to be $282 billion. It will be much bigger. 1992, $348 billion, an all-time record. So now you see why George Bush wants to bomb Iraq and have another year of celebration and parties and returning home. Now, what else is he worried about? The scandals. October surprise. Did Bush do it or not? It doesn't matter. Somebody did, and Bush knew about it. William Casey, who's dead, as Bush said, you want to question him? Dig him up. Because Bush won't talk. Bush, the man of read my lips. He doesn't want you to read his lips on these issues. What about Iran-Contra? That's suddenly come to life again. LaRouche was absolutely right on these things. He said this is an administration that rules by covert operations and secret government. Finally, Walsh has gotten someone to plead guilty. This guy fires. And now everyone's diving back into the woodwork. Secord, that pompous pseudo-patriot, comes on Nightline and he says, you see, it wasn't just us guys, it was the CIA too. Well, you bet it was the CIA. And if Robert Gates didn't know, then that's proof of his incompetence to become CIA director. He didn't know about this massive arms operation being run by his agency. What about Bush and the Special Situations Group? His man, Donald Gregg, currently the ambassador to South Korea, was in on this. And so on. There's more and more that's going to come out on this. There's also an element of this which is quite significant, which is the LaRouche case. The targeting of Lyndon LaRouche by Kissinger and by Bush began when Lyndon LaRouche told them that he would not support the illegal Contra operation and that instead he would expose it. It was at that point, that the FBI and the Justice Department started working with private groups like the Anti-Defamation League to go after LaRouche. And they got LaRouche and they put him in jail to try and silence him. And as the dirt spills out in Iran-Contra, it will soon come out that George Bush is sitting on thousands of pages of documents which prove that LaRouche was a victim of illegal government operations. And there's one other case that's coming out now, which is that of the woman known as April Glaspie, who was the U.S. ambassador to Iraq. There was an article just the other day in the New York Times on this, which points out that Glaspie lied when she came before the Congress to tell her story. She met with Saddam shortly before the invasion of Kuwait, and the Iraqis printed the transcripts from that. And she told Saddam that the State Department has no opinions on Arab conflicts. When she spoke before the State Department, she said, the Iraqi transcripts are a lie. I gave him a stern warning. Well, sorry, Ms. Glaspie, but the State Department cables that she sent to the State Department were released this week. And they showed that what the Iraqis said was true, that she never did warn Iraq. Not only that, but they now have cables that were sent by the State Department to Ms. Glaspie, which also said, try to maintain friendship with Iraq. Furthermore, one of these was signed George Bush. So according to this, George Bush sent a memo to the U.S. ambassador to Iraq on July 28th, days before the attack, in which he said that we should inform Saddam that we wish to have peace with him and that we hope that he'll abide by UN agreements. If the U.S. was worried about this, why didn't Bush say, get your 100,000 troops away from the border? It's because Bush is deeply involved in this. The Iraq War was something Bush wanted to try and cover up these other aspects, the economy and also the other dirt. And now on top of all this, we have the Bush health question. So will there be a thyroid storm 2? Well, we can hope not. But the pattern of evidence, as far as Bush's health, as far as the collapse of the economy, the collapse of his economic and foreign policies, indicate that he's going to be forced to take another desperate action to try and maintain his alleged popularity. And this brings up a question that Lyndon LaRouche has been pondering recently from his prison cell in Rochester, Minnesota. Why is it that the American people seem to like George Bush? Why is it that this guy is still in the 70%, at least according to these opinion polls? What does that say about us? What I've presented here is documented evidence. It's in the congressional record. It's in biographies. It's in even the New York Times has printed some of this. That we have a president who is psychologically heavily affected by his current physical condition and the drugs he's taking. A president who's, I would argue, incapable of being a decent president. That is, he's committed to policies that go against the American system. He's opposed to the civil rights legislation going back to its start. It's a man who rules by lying and police state tactics, who puts his political opponents in jail. There's something called the Frumention policy of the FBI. And the Frumention policy, which was exposed by Congressman Dimely in 1988, is an unofficial doctrine of the FBI which says that black political leaders are not capable of running governments and are inherently susceptible to corruption, and that the FBI should target black officials to prove that they're corrupt. And the fact of the matter is that 60% of black elected officials are either under investigation, under indictment, or in jail because of these kind of stings. And Bush sent William Sessions down to the NAACP conference last week to try and recruit support from minorities for the Bush administration. And I'm happy to tell you that these people would not go for it at all. The idea of civil rights leaders going to the FBI for help is crazy. I mean, the FBI rebuilt the Ku Klux Klan in most of the southern states. This movie, Mississippi Burning, which shows the FBI fighting the Klan while Mississippi blacks are passively watching from under the bed, is a total lie. It's a Hollywood fantasy to prop up the myth of the FBI. So when William Sessions came to the NAACP and said, "We really like you, we want to work with you, Bush wants to help you," when they had their special session on the FBI and civil rights, less than 20 people showed up for it. Yet they're pushing this. They think they can get away with it. They think they can convince you that we're in an economic recovery. And so from his prison cell, Lyndon LaRouche sent out this message the other day, and I think it's one that all of you should ponder in thinking about our responsibility for allowing this myth of Bush, the decent, popular president, to survive, because that is a myth that's hurting us, it's hurting the world, it's destroying our country.